Me, I'm a Comedian. I'm Ashwin Segkar, and each week psychologist Rachel Hannam and I chat to a comedian about the darker parts of their psyche, because a lot of comics learn to use humour to deal with trauma and mental illness. Rachel, how often do patients talk about a traumatic experience and then say something like, "Oh, I know I shouldn't complain, it could be worse"?
It's very common. I think it's quite normal for people to minimise their own pain and their own experiences. If it hasn't had acknowledgement from the key people in their life earlier, then they have also kind of not acknowledged what they've experienced.
That might be the mindset of our guest today, Amy Driscoll. Amy, before we get into your story, can you explain that mindset that you're not troubled enough for counselling?
It's actually really hard to explain because I'm in my 40s now, and it's only been recently that I've realised that there's key parts of my personality that have been formed by the things that happened to me like every day for years of my childhood. And I've normalised them. I think it's perfectly normal, and that's fine. I can't point to a single incident and go, oh, yes, that's when I was traumatically went through this event. So I don't feel like I need help because this is just me now. But also, as part of my trauma, I've realised recently, I don't have a huge amount of self-worth within myself. So I don't think I deserve help, and I don't think other people should be spending their time trying to help me. I feel like in any sort of relationship I'm in, if I'm not bringing something of great value, then there's no reason to be in a relationship with me or to pay attention to me or to support me.
Amy, can you paint a picture of what it was like for you with your mum and dad growing up and where this script may have come from?
In really basic terms, my dad was very narcissistic and my mum was anxious and depressed, and she was a cancer patient from probably the time I was 16 until the time she died, which was a couple of years ago. They were good people. They were still struggling with the things that they were struggling with, and I understand that as an adult, which I really didn't understand as a child. The comedy that I do now is improvised comedy. It's very much in the moment, and it's very much about connecting with other humans on stage. I think part of it's because when I was a kid, with my siblings, we used to like to put on, plays for the parents, and you get a song and you put it on and you do a dance. We did one for my dad once. It was Romeo and Juliet. It was terrible. I think I was 8. And I remember this because I was wearing a pastel green jumpsuit, which was the style at the time.
That's also from Enter the Dragon, so you could have crossed over into that if you wanted.
I could. No, this was Romeo and Juliet, okay? It was classy.
Okay, sorry.
But we were being very subversive. There were fart jokes. It was amazing. So we got my dad to come in and sit down. He'd just come home from work. He'd had dinner, everything. We were just chilling for the night. And my dad stopped us about halfway through and he said, "Stop wasting my time. That's vulgar. That's not cool. But that is a waste of my time." And then he just sort of yelled at us for about 10 minutes. And as an adult, I'm like, I cannot conceive of anybody that I know doing this to a child.
Yeah.
But as a child, I internalized that as being true and correct.
Yes.
And so I'd never perform to him again, basically.
Of course.
And even now, when I do perform, I tend to rely on other people's opinions of what I've done in preference to my own. I don't really have an opinion on the work I do. I depend very heavily on feedback from the people around me, which is why impro's great as well, because you get constant feedback from the people you're on stage with. So that was one thing.
Do you remember how you felt when he said those things?
Utterly crushed.
Yes.
You know how you see kids and they've got their head down and they're sort of starting to disappear, like they're wishing themselves out of the room. And I think that's when I started just huge imagination and moving into that mental space of I'm not here, I'm somewhere else, I'm somewhere better.
The dissociation that you
Yes.
spoke of.
Yeah.
Does this also connect to what you said earlier when you talked about you feel like you need to bring value to friendships? Because when you said that, I was thinking, I don't bring much value at all. Sometimes friends get a text from me once a month, maybe a lunch. I don't feel like kind of performance anxiety to deliver in a friendship. But the language you use, I thought that's quite interesting. Do you feel like you're on show, like you've got to nail the performance in order to be a good friend?
The thing with narcissists is that you always have to demonstrate a value for them, otherwise you have no value to them. You have to be a high achiever, you have to look good, you have to be charming and witty. They have to be able to brag about you to their friends. When you're in the room, they have to be able to show you off. So it's about being at that level where they can say, I am proud of this person. And if they don't have that, then you just don't exist for them. And if they're not interested in what you're doing, you don't exist for them. And it's actually better for you not to be there because you're distracting from them. So for me, it's about I have to look good, I have to dress nice, I have to be witty and charming, my place has to be clean. If people come over, I have to feed them. I can't just let them sit there. And once they leave, I start sitting there and anxiously going through, did I miss a cue? Did they need something that I didn't provide them? Should I text them to ask if I did everything okay? No, don't do that. That's weird, Amy. We've learned that. That...
Psychologists call this unrelenting standards.
Yeah. As a kid, I remember having great experiences of my dad saying, you did a great job, you look great today, you're cute. But once I hit a certain age, it started becoming, you're getting a bit chubby. Have you thought about a diet? Do you really need to eat that? And I'm not talking like puberty. I'm talking like I was 8. Like when you're 8, you don't think about what you're eating. You eat because you're hungry. If you're getting weight issues, that might be related to something that's got nothing to do with you. But then again, also, why am I trying to justify that now? I was 8. Why is my dad telling me I'm fat when I'm 8? That's just mean.
Yeah, and you lose your own sense of innocence.
Yes.
Which you want to find a way now to restore because, you were an innocent kid doing your best then and you're an innocent human doing your best now.
Well, one of the ways I've been trying to deal with everything is to think of it from an observer and the observed kind of perspective. So I think, something happens to me where I might be like, my husband says, you're beautiful. And I'm like, that's not true. And then I think, well, that's a weird thing to think when someone gives you a compliment. You should really try to take that on board and accept that someone who loves you thinks you're beautiful because you think they're beautiful. So now I'm like, well, why do I think that? Go back, think about the memory, and then try to observe the memory as though it's happening to that person distinct from you.
Yes.
And think about, well, if I was in the room with this and this was happening, what would I think of this interaction?
Great.
And who's to blame here? And what's really going on? And is this really about, child Amy having a screaming match with her father because he's breaking her boundaries again? Or is this about him pushing her boundaries in a way that's not healthy for her? And then from that perspective, what would my best friend say about this? What would another adult say about this? And trying to bring that into it. But it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, but it's highly effective. You've cottoned on to something that is an actual therapy called schema mode therapy, where we use the imagination to go back into traumatic memories, developmental memories, and rewrite those scripts, play around with the scenario so that we can see the innocence of the younger version of ourselves, and we can, the messages we've internalized, we can sort of externalize them. We can, see clearly and then, give the shame and fear back to the perpetrator, in inverted commas, rather than continue to carry it inside of yourself. So it's interesting that you've spontaneously kind of come to what is a therapeutic practice.
Well, now I feel like I've won something. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you a certificate after the show.
Classic self-healing. Can we dive more into these scripts? Because we're imbibing these parental messages, and you've talked about your father's narcissism. Is there anything else you'd like to say about his influence, or is there something you can say about your mother as well and what script you got from her?
So first of all, if you're anxious and depressed, it's a very difficult thing to go through, particularly if it's not acknowledged and it's never been treated. If you're married to a narcissist, it's even worse. And if you're then going through cancer treatments and bankruptcy, it's a very difficult place to be in emotionally. So I have full sympathy for my mother. She did do, there are things she did that have done things to me. I remember one particular incident, we were sitting down and she was just unburdening herself to me, telling me about some terrible things that had happened to her. And because the way I think, I was trying to say, I understand where you're coming from because similar things have happened to me and it was these things. And she just sort of looked at me like she had been destroyed and said, Amy, if I'm telling you about something bad that happened to me, I just need you to listen. I don't want to hear about yours. And I thought, oh, so that's my job, is to be the receptacle for these things, but not to give them back and get support for it. So it wasn't deliberate. She wasn't trying to traumatize me. But since then, I've had a lot of trouble telling people if something's bothering me because my job is to listen and to be supportive, not to be supported.
And you don't feel like you deserve to be seen and to be heard.
Yeah. And look, bear in mind, too, this was when I was, I think, 14.
Yes.
And that is a very young age to suddenly be responsible for
your mother's feelings,
my mother's emotional well-being.
Yeah.
See, part of the narcissist thing is that they often don't spend much time at home because you can't give them the feedback that they want. They want positive feedback from people they respect. and they don't respect their kids or their wives as much as they should. So
They call that narcissistic supply. Have you heard that term?
No, I have not.
You don't supply them with the validation and adoration that they require.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he wasn't home very much. He would be out doing business dinners and things. He was probably down the coast at his other apartment with his mistress. But anyway, so it was me. There were 4 other kids in the family because it was a big family. So I was doing like house repairs. I was shooing stray dogs out of the backyard. I was doing the plumbing, and I was doing high school, and I was also the big sister, and my youngest sister's 10 years younger than me. So when I was 14, she was 4. So I was doing a lot of that. My mother was doing daycare to try to financially support the house, because the other thing with narcissists is that their money is for them, not really for you. Like, if you are in desperate times, they will give you some money because it reflects badly on them if their family is starving. But other than that, it's not really about you.
Well, they don't have empathy.
No, they don't have empathy.
Your mum had to have multiple cancer treatments at one point as a result of getting HPV from your father's affairs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
This is something that developed over the course of several years. When I was in my late teens, I found my dad's souvenir collection, which was like love letters and photos and cards and some tapes of pornography of him committing sexual acts with women who were just slightly older than me at that time, which was another piece of trauma, which was fun.
Oh, gosh.
So I knew he was having affairs. At that point in time, I assumed that my mother either knew but couldn't do anything because she didn't have, she didn't work. Her job was to be mum at home.
Yeah.
She was going through cancer treatments, and she had all these other things that were going on. So I assumed either she knew and she didn't want to do anything, or she didn't know, and I didn't want to have to be the one to tell her and then to take her through that process.
Too much of a burden.
It was. It was a lot. So I did what every good daughter does, and I photocopied everything and copied the tape so I'd have something in case they did decide to get divorced to be used. And then I got to live with that stuff for a while, and it moved with me from share house to share house, which was just delightful.
Oh, gosh.
Eventually, after they had divorced, I got rid of it, which was cathartic. And some of it I actually got my then partner to watch so that he was aware of the contents, but I didn't have to be exposed to it. Because,
Did you ever tell her? Yeah.
So bad.
Gosh, it would be so bad. Did you ever tell her about it?
Yes, I did. So my dad embezzled a bunch of money. Again, when you're a narcissist, you think you're smarter than everyone else and you're going to get away with it and you can pay it back and you know how the money market's going to go and it's going to be fine. It wasn't. He got caught. The police got called in, and one day they went to my mother and they said, "You realise he's been using some of this money to fund a second lifestyle. You know that he's got an apartment on the Gold Coast, right? And that he's supporting a woman who's living there." She didn't know. She didn't know any of it. So she called me that night and she broke down on the phone and she's like, "Your dad's been having an affair." I'm like, "Yes, I know. I've known about this for a couple of years. I thought you knew." Because the other thing was, it seemed pretty obvious to me.
Yes.
He's never at home. He gets weird phone calls. He's got all this evidence lying around the place. You're married to him. How could you not know?
Yeah.
So...
The power of denial.
Yeah. Plus, I don't know if it was conscious either. Like, did she know that it was happening, but know that she couldn't do anything about it? And so she decided not to know.
At some level, she knew something, but she didn't want to know.
Yeah, that's my current theory, because I know for a fact that friends of hers would come up to her and say, "I saw him at the shopping centre. He was holding hands with another woman." And she would say, "Well, it must have been someone else then, because that's not my husband."
She didn't want to know.
She didn't want to know. So, which is fair enough. If that's how she gets through things, that's what happens. So she told me, and at that point I said, "Yes, I've known for a while. I've got a box of evidence under my bed if you need it for the divorce proceedings." And she said, "Oh." And then she cried a lot. And then I found out later she'd been speaking to other members of my family going, "Amy knew, and she actually has a box of evidence that I can use in the divorce proceedings to make sure it goes quickly and easily for me." And so they were very proud of me for that, which is a weird thing to be. It's a weird positive outcome from the experience.
Well, it showed courage on your behalf and resourcefulness.
It just feels icky, to be honest.
And it felt really icky.
Yeah.
But do you see the resourcefulness in what you did? You thought ahead. Thought, this could be something that could happen in the future and, maybe...
Let's just get ready for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are listening to ABC Radio with psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam and comedian Amy Driscoll. Can you tell us more about the car accident that you were involved in?
I was trying to stretch myself socially. I'd stayed behind at church and I was talking to people, and my family forgot me, so I was there by myself. So I had to call home and someone had to come pick me up. So my mother drove out to pick me up, and she was tired and anxious and sad as usual. She drove me home, and on the way home we got into a car accident. So she got T-boned, basically. We were in a van. She ended up on the road, and she had a nervous breakdown. Like, she was crying. She was getting mild burns from the tarmac that she was lying on, and she was just destroyed and distraught and completely, we called an ambulance, they took her away. So I got home after this event, and my father started yelling at me, and he said, "This is your fault. Her breakdown is your fault. This is your fault." Mm-hmm. And then I think he left. I'm not really sure because I blacked that out. So he basically said, "Your mother's nervous breakdown, this is your responsibility. You made this happen. This is your fault." And I went into another room and I cried, I think, for about 3 hours.
Yeah.
Into a pillow.
Because you've been blamed for something when you were completely innocent. Because he can't handle his feelings.
Yes. But at the end of that 3 hours, all emotions have been drained out of me. Mm. And I had a moment where I just thought, this isn't your fault.
Good.
But also, who says that to their own kid?
A narcissist.
I didn't know that at the time, though. I had no words for what was going on.
So you couldn't make sense of it.
So I just said, I don't think he loves you. And so that's the message I took away, which is basically, that man is your father and he doesn't love you. So you don't have to pay attention or give weight to anything he does from here on out.
That was a pretty good conclusion to come to as a young person in order not to internalise it as much.
As an adult, I wonder if that was just a defence mechanism to stop me from bringing that into myself.
Totally, but it's probably the best option you had in that situation. And I would say you have pretty good intrapersonal intelligence to be able to come to that realisation without any external input of someone telling you, hey, it's not your fault, you're not responsible for this.
That was the thing, though. I came to the end and I'm like, it's actually a relief.
Yes.
I don't have to worry about this person's opinion anymore.
Can we look into a couple of other areas that may have shaped you as you were young? And then I'd love to talk about what the long-term influence has been of those effects. So we've talked about your father a lot. You were also raised a Mormon. Mm-hmm. Can you explain how religion shaped you for better or worse?
I don't even know how to begin to encapsulate what that's like, because my experience of it, of course, is different from other people's. Some of my family members are still Mormon, and they're very happy in that way. One of the things growing up is I always thought I would get married, be a mother, and I wouldn't have a job. So it was a bit of a shock to the system when I got to university and thought, oh, I should really learn how to support myself. I haven't even had a boyfriend. And to be honest, I don't want to be a stay-at-home mum. In fact, I don't think I want to have children. So that was those sort of identity moments where you're working through that sort of thing.
Breaking the script.
Yes.
The formula.
It is actually literally a script in my head. There's a song that they sing in primary which goes, when I grow up, I want to be a mother and have a family. 1 little, 2 little, 3 little babies of my own. Yeah, I can see your eyes. You're doing the face. That's the face. It's appropriate. But we sang that repetitively. And so if you're talking about like ingraining scripts into people, sometimes the songs and the words and that is just, it's a bit insane.
Yeah.
To be, and if you explain that to people, they're like, oh, that's not trauma types. And you're like, if you're 6 and they're making you sing this on Mother's Day to your mother, and this is how you appreciate your mother, yes, it becomes a program in your head. Yeah. And that loops.
And breaking that is no small undertaking.
When I said trauma smorgasbord, this was on the smorgasbord. So when I was 13, I got a crush on a girl, massively, in high school. She was just beautiful, dark brown hair, lovely throaty voice, like someone who smokes 6 packs a day. She was a percussionist, just beautiful girl. Unfortunately, I didn't actually know what it meant to be like gay or bisexual or anything like that at that point in time. Like, this is weird. I really like this person. Why do I like them so much? I just want to hold hands with her all the time. And eventually I realised that that meant that I was bisexual. But according to my religion, that's not something that I could choose to be, because it shouldn't happen naturally. I should have to be influenced by outside influences to make that happen. But if I don't know what that is before I am that thing, doesn't that mean that comes from inside of me? And if it comes from inside of me, that means that either God has made me this way and then told me I'm not supposed to be this way, in which case I'm not going to worship this person because that's mean, or the people who are telling me that God says this are wrong, or God probably doesn't exist, which I still have difficulty saying, in which case I should be an atheist and live my life according to what I think is good and correct as opposed to what someone is telling me is good and correct.
Which one of those beliefs did you gravitate towards the most?
The thing is, you can't pick these things when you're 14 and you're going through your first identity crisis and you're living at home with your religious parent. You kind of have to develop this in stages. So at 14, I thought, oh, this might not be right. And then at 16, I'm like, okay, I'm going to cut back on my religious fervour a little bit and really think about how I want my life to look. And then eventually when I was 18, I was able to move out and stop attending youth group and stop going to sermons and stop going to churches and things like that. But the other thing to realise is that that was my entire social circle at that point in time. So when I moved out of that, I left behind family members and I left behind all of my friends and all of my mentors. And I had to kind of try to replace all of those people in my life. Mm-hmm. In addition, I was trying to replace a structure within myself. So the foundation of everything that I believed and the way that I related to the world, I had to try and find something new. So I tried Buddhism and meditation and witchcraft and a whole bunch of other things and philosophies until I came to a point where I was like, okay, I'm going to take these things that I like from all these different groups and I'm going to use that to build myself a new set of foundations of the way that I relate to the world and the way that I think I should be as a good person.
Did you end up finding a foundation that was equally strong, or did you get comfortable with the fact that you cannot create a foundation that's strong and that's okay?
The second one. Because I also realised that as a society we change constantly, cultures change constantly, and when you're relating to people as a good person, you have to see them as another individual. You can't relate to them in the way that you think they want to be related to. You have to understand how they want to be treated and learn to treat them in that way. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, where I haven't given it a name and I try not to follow a guru or a leader because those are people who are also flawed. And blindly giving up my self-autonomy to those people is a really good way of denying my personhood.
Amy, we've touched on a few themes so far. The loss of purpose from your Mormon faith, always having to perform for a narcissist. If you were to summarise the lingering effects of all these different childhood influences, what would you say you've been left with?
You know, there are things that I would change, but some of the things have been gifts to me. Coming out of a religion and then trying to form my own sense of self has given me a sense of contentment and security, which means that I feel like I'm a good person and it's not something that I usually have to question. I've got a lot more freedom in the way I choose to structure my life. I'm not confined to a heterosexual, monogamous, normative relationship. I can choose to relate to people in the way that I want to relate to them. Growing up with a narcissist has meant that I'm actually really good at convincing people to do what I want them to do, which sounds strange, but if you have to talk to a narcissist, you've always got to pitch it to them so that they convince themselves that they want to do what you want them to do.
Make them think it's their idea.
Exactly. My partners at the moment are really good people because growing up with a narcissist and growing up with someone who's very self-involved, I've learned to spot that in other people. And while I might be initially attracted to charming assholes, eventually I'm like, oh no, this is that cocky, charming thing that you like, but underneath, fundamentally, you know this person's going to hurt you. So you're not going to have a relationship with this person. Whereas I know that I have friends who grew up with wonderful parents and great fathers, and they married terrible people because they didn't know how to spot the red flags. So that was a gift.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't wish a traumatic childhood on anybody, but I've also seen people who've grown up with very warm, close, loving families who reached adulthood quite naive to the possible traumas and harms that can occur in the world.
It just doesn't occur to them that someone would do that to them until they're confronted with it.
Yeah, whereas you learned early what could happen.
I have a great game which I call, let me tell you something about my childhood and see at what point you make the face. The last time I spoke to my dad, he was in jail. And they're like, what? And you're like, oh, yeah, we were having a conversation and it was a test. It was the final test. I'm like, if you don't ask me anything about myself in the next hour, I'm never speaking to you again. And guess who won the test? Me. He spent an hour giving me life advice while he was sitting in jail after his divorce. You literally have nothing to stand on right now. Do you have any interest in me as a person? No? Okay, we're done. And that was cathartic.
Yeah. And it helped you see really clearly him for who he is.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
15 years.
Okay, you've had no contact.
Oh, no, we've had contact because we still have family.
Yeah.
So I'll see him at weddings and things like that.
Okay. So the acknowledgement and validation that you crave for so long, you've had to learn both to give that to yourself and also get it from other trustworthy sources.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it is a benefit of being able to pick those people. I'm surrounded these days by really wonderful people, like kind, creative, emotionally connective, trustworthy people who are what I would call a huge blessing in my life. And when they tell me things, I know that they're true and they have more weight and more depth and more resonance with me. So I'm very lucky.
And I think your story is testimony to the resilience of the human being, the human spirit.
You've gained a lot of strength from everything you've gone through. One thing you touched on at the start was that your self-esteem has been affected. Can we come back to that? How has it been affected, and what role does low self-esteem play in your life today?
The sense of self-esteem can sometimes peak and trough depending on what's happened in the most recent events. I find I have a struggle sometimes with my self-identity, and as part of that, my self-esteem, the way I value myself. And particularly if I'm getting depressed or if I'm getting anxious, it gets worse. And I realised this the other day where I had friends coming over. We were going to have a nice night. And I was frantically running around. I was trying to clean. I was trying to cater. I was trying to get everything perfect for them. And at some point I had to stop and say, wait a minute, they're coming to see you. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be clean. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to provide ambient music and lighting and the correct temperature and a bottle of chilled wine. If you were here by yourself, would they be upset that it was just you? And I said, no, they wouldn't. They'd be happy just to sit and talk to me. And that was when I realised that I need to start thinking about how much I value myself outside of what I can provide for other people.
Rachel, can you expand on the importance of that realisation?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a brilliant example of rewriting the script right there and then. You became aware that this was an old pattern or an old script. I have to do everything just right, and it's only what I can give to other people that gives me value. And as soon as you recognise that in yourself, I think you did a great job of being able to go, hang on, I have value. And that's a very different message, isn't it? I imagine you had a shift in how you felt.
It actually still makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. So this is ongoing work, right? It's ongoing work because those old scripts are profoundly conditioned into our whole system. So, this is a life's work. But in psychology, we talk about noticing the frequency, intensity and duration of trauma reactions or trauma responses. So I want to ask you, do you notice that these kind of episodes for you or responses are maybe either not as frequent as they used to be, not as intense as they used to be, or don't last as long as they used to?
I think they're not as frequent or as intense as they used to be.
Great. That's as good as it gets sometimes.
But the other thing is I found because I'm aware of it, I can empower people around me to help. As I said, I'm surrounded by lovely people now.
Yes.
So I can turn to them and say, I just need you to tell me that I'm doing a good job right now.
Yes.
And they'll say, you're doing a good job. And then that will be fine. I'm good for the rest of the week.
Seeking social support is possibly the most empowering tool we have for our mental health.
Someone was telling me that when you're judging how you're behaving, you should act, the question to ask was, how am I being in this moment? Like, what kind of person am I being with this action? And I found that's actually quite a good way to look at, am I being bold? Am I being empowered? Or am I being weak and scared and fearful? And
it's similar to one I offer my clients, which is, what sort of person do I want to be under these circumstances? So it taps into your values.
Yeah.
Whether you've just made a mistake or whether how do I want to handle this? What kind of person do I want to be in this situation? Can help you dig deeper into your core values, which is sitting underneath all of the anxiety and old scripts and, the conditioning.
Comedian Amy Driscoll and psychologist Rachel Hannam, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Ashwin.
Thank you.
On ABC Radio, this was Help Me, I'm a Comedian. If the conversation today has made you want to talk to someone, Lifeline provides 24-hour crisis counselling. Their number is 13 11 14, or you can find other resources at beyondblue.org.au. Alternatively, you can speak to your GP now and arrange Medicare-supported sessions with a psychologist. You can find this and all of our other interviews on the ABC Radio website, abc.net.au/radio/programs/editor's choice. I'm Ashwin Segkar. See you next week.